Hi everyone, my name's Kara the polar bear, and today I'll be teaching you all about climate change and the effect that it has on food webs in the Arctic. Let's take a look at our learning objectives. Today, I hope to give you a deeper understanding of climate change and teach you some new vocabulary. I hope that you'll also understand the effects that climate change has on animals in extreme climates, as well as the effect that it has on food chains and food webs. We will also take a look at some research conducted in the Arctic, and afterwards we will have a discussion and take a look at some comprehension questions. Alright, let's get started by learning some new vocabulary. As you know, climate change is today's overarching topic. It is essentially the rise of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which creates an overall warmer climate. The results of climate change come in many different forms. Forest fires, pollution, rising sea levels, tsunamis, and melting sea ice are just a few examples, but its effects can be seen everywhere. An indicator species is a plant or animal that is observed in its environment to see the effects of another event. In our case, the indicator species is me, the polar bear, and the event occurring is climate change. Next we have what is called a food web, which is closely related to something called a food chain. A food chain is a mind map that demonstrates the flow of energy from one organism to another. A food web is a collection of multiple chains together and how they interact with one another. I will explain both of these mind maps later in the video to further your understanding of the subject. One of the terms that appears in these mind maps is called a diatom. This is a type of algae that is unicellular. Another word that also appears is called a copepod, which is a microscopic crustaceous organism that lives in water. Both the diatom and the copepod are part of the food web and food chain for the polar bear. The next term that we have is predation. Predation means the act of one animal hunting another. Ecosystem perspective means approaching a topic with the idea that the organisms in the ecosystem are connected to one another. Sound familiar? This connects directly with the idea of food webs and food chains. A predator is an organism that hunts another organism. In our case, it's the polar bear. Prey is the opposite of the predator. It is the organism that is being hunted, like the ringed seal. Scavenge is another way of saying to look for food. Correlation means the relationship or connection between two ideas. Biodiversity is the variety of plant and animal species that live in any given ecosystem. Extinction is when all the members of a singular species die. Solidarity is a synonym for unity, and in our case it means the unity amongst food webs. Greenhouse gases are gases like carbon dioxide, methane, ozone, water vapor, and nitrous oxide. These gases are released into the atmosphere by pollution. These gases then trap the sun's heat and create a warmer climate. Okay, now that we have our bases covered a little bit with the terminology, let's jump into some quick facts about polar bears. Polar bears are quite large animals. They can be anywhere from 1.8 to 2.7 meters long. That's bigger than a refrigerator. They can weigh about as much as a grand piano too. Now that's heavy. Polar bears live in the Arctic Circle on ice, and their primary food source is the ringed and bearded seals. Now why is all of this so important? Polar bears are an indicator species of climate change, meaning that their environment has a large impact on their lifestyle. They are also considered a top predator in their food chain. There is no animal in their food chain to hunt them, making them a top predator. The well-being of the polar bear has a direct impact on their food web. Now that we're a bit more familiar with the polar bear and why it's so important, let's take a look at its food chain and food web. First, let's take a look at the polar bear's food chain. There are quite a few elements here. Remember, a food chain is a visual demonstration of the flow of energy from one organism to another. Let's start at the beginning with algae. It grows on sea ice, and the diatoms eat it. Next, the copepods, which are little crustaceous organisms, eat the diatoms. The Arctic cod then eat the copepods. The ringed seals then eat the Arctic cod, and the polar bears eat the ringed seals. In each step of the food chain, the energy is passed from one organism to another, based upon what it eats. Now let's take a look at the food web. If we look close enough, we can see the food chain that we just looked at mixed inside with all of the arrows. Can you spot it? Here it is. Food webs include much more information than a food chain. They consider the flow of energy for an entire ecosystem. Which is the top predator in this food web? It's the human. It is the only organism in the food web that is able to successfully hunt the polar bear. Now that we understand food webs and food chains, let's dive a little bit deeper into the subject. With the research I have collected, I found a study that examined the predation of polar bears on ringed seals with an ecosystem perspective. In other words, the researchers studied the predator and prey relationships in the Arctic ecosystem. They concluded that polar bears scavenge or look for other food to eat, and they do not solely rely on ringed seals for their diet. Why is that important? Well, the fact that polar bears scavenge for other food correlates to food webs and the concept of biodiversity. If you remember correctly, biodiversity is the variety of plants and animals in any given ecosystem. When biodiversity is high, it's favorable for an ecosystem because it increases its sustainability. In our case, when biodiversity is high, polar bears will feed on the abundant species, such as Arctic cod, instead of ringed seals. However, when biodiversity is low, the polar bears rely on ringed seals to get their nutrition. So, if polar bears can adapt and hunt for different prey, what's the big deal? Why should we care about climate change? The truth is, climate change is occurring too quickly for polar bears to adapt properly. Adaptation normally takes thousands of years, and the effects of climate change happen too rapidly for it to occur. The polar bear's habitat is changing because the sea ice is melting, and their changes in predation alter the food webs. Because they are the top predators, it alters the flow of energy through the entire web. And what would happen if the polar bear just went extinct? It would have a heavy and detailed impact on not only its food web, but other food webs around the world. Food webs are connected and stand together in solidarity. Now it's time for discussion. Let's share ideas and opinions about this topic and review the concepts a little bit. Toss around a water bottle to take turns speaking. When the discussion is finished, review the concepts by completing the comprehension check questions. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.